Many of us are aching to start traveling again, with some wanting to visit family and some wanting to get as far away as possible. As the pandemic seems to be going away, airlines have started flying more people around the world. But what is the most important part of a flight? Is it the many movies you forgot even existed? Probably. Is it the anticipation of getting to your destination? Equally likely. But even though it might not seem obvious, the thing that makes a flight awesome, if done right, is good airplane food.
Welcome to Spoonable Standpoint, the podcast where your hosts Leo and Charlene dig into food culture. In this episode, we'll be discussing how airplane food has evolved and morphed into what we know today. With airlines starting to become popular again post-pandemic, the question of whether or not airplane food will get better comes to mind. What can they do to make it better? And what steps have they already taken to do so? But first, how did modern airplane food come to be?
For most of human history, travel between countries meant either horse-driven vehicles or a boat. However, these options were time-consuming and outright dangerous if you encountered trouble, so the revolutionary new technology of the train sparked joy and interest all around the world. But if you wanted to travel from Europe to America, there was no train to take you since no bridge was built across the seas to do this. Boats and ferries would still be in use for a long time. However, in 1914, all of that changed. What if you could get from one place to another quickly, regardless of how many oceans you had to cross?
The answer, as we know of it now, would be in the dominion of the birds, the sky. Since the dawn of innovation, humans have strived to fly, and with the Wright brothers, that was achieved. But the plane they had invented wasn't the most efficient, and it was not fit for long travel. But with technology advancing and the world on the brink of war, the St. Petersburg-Tampa airboat line was able to fly people from Russia to Florida, igniting the start of one of the most important innovations in travel, commercialized flying. And for a long time, the most important part of commercialized flying was airplane food.
When commercialized airlines began, airplanes were not the technological monstrosities they are now. When it started full swing in the 1920s, World War I had improved planes, but the engines weren't quite strong enough to have much weight. So if the passengers were being weighed due to a problem with the weight, the food was going to be a problem as well. There wouldn't be enough energy that could be diverted from vital services to cook food, so the only food served was cold. Surprisingly, this didn't mean that airlines made food any less appetizing.
During the 1920s and a few decades later, the food was mostly great sandwiches and cold fried chicken served on appealing but incredibly lightweight china. If you were to book on a more fancy airline, you might even get a lobster salad and fancy cheese.
But the 1930s had a brand new innovation that would change airplane food forever: onboard kitchens. This meant that on nicer planes like Pan Am's Clipper, there were even dining rooms. Food like steak made on the plane was beginning to be served on, and airplane food began to be considered incredibly important to the flight. Before televisions on planes, the best form of entertainment was the food, so being able to set an atmosphere where it felt as though you were at a restaurant would pass time and also make flights more enjoyable.
In the 1940s and 50s, airlines started to use frozen food that would be reheated, and this was incredibly efficient. It meant that it was easier to cook things for the passengers, but it also meant there could be more variety. During these decades, you start to see the adoption of specialized food based on which airline you'd fly. For example, American Airlines would serve Texan food since they were based in Texas, while Southern Airlines would cater to a more Louisiana taste. But, like the 1930s, the atmosphere was considered incredibly important, so fancier planes still had dining rooms.
With the 1960s came an even bigger innovation that completely changed how food was served on planes. This was the decade when jets began to be used in commercial flights. Jets were much faster than the planes before, which meant that it took less time to get to places with more people. Although this is great, it meant that airlines had to completely change how they serve food. No more dining rooms because it meant a lot of moving around, and there was little time to quickly serve people on a now 3-hour flight.
Airlines started to serve food in plastic containers instead of glassware, which meant no more doing dishes. We all know doing the dishes is everyone's least favorite chore. So they would serve food that took less time to eat, like deboned food or foods that didn't require a fork and knife. This was when the food stopped being difficult to prepare and could easily be assembled and eaten.
With the 70s came changes to the airline system. In 1978, the Airline Deregulation Act was passed by Congress, which meant that there was less regulation on airlines and that they could have more mobility to move to new places with more people. Although this made flying much cheaper, it made flying much more popular as well. This meant that it was harder to serve a full-course meal to so many people, and this is how economy class was born. Those who were in first or business class would get their gourmet full-course meal, while those in economy would be paying much less and would get less and cheaper food. Not only that, but since you would be paying less, you'd have a much more cramped seat, since legroom went down by 4 full inches.
The compromised quality of the food was key to keeping costs and time down, and this is when airplane food started to have a bad reputation. Unless you were in first class, of course. This is what the airplane experience is like today. It used to be that no matter the flight, you would get a meal. But now meals are only served on multiple-hour flights. The food on short flights is a measly bag of unsalted pretzels or sweet peanuts. But has airplane food changed since the drastic change in the 70s? But most importantly, is it getting better?
I myself haven't been on many flights, but a lot of the flights that I have been on had pretty good food. I remember one flight on Air China, and I was really young at the time. It was kind of my first flight that I was able to remember, but I was pretty excited for the first time flying, and when the food came, I was shocked. I mean, it was a lot better than I initially expected, especially since airplanes had to serve so many people at that time. So the first meal I had, since it was a really long flight, was pretty good. It came with sides like yogurt and fruits, and I think the main portion were tater tots. And then we had another meal later in the flight, which I would consider even better. It had like bread with like teddy bear designs on it, and it was pasta, which I loved. And it was more kid-friendly, obviously, because we got the kids' meal, but it was impressive compared to other airplane foods I've seen online and other experiences that I've had myself. But the thing was, with being stuck in a metal tube in tens of thousands of feet in the air, with the cabin pressure and recycled air flowing around, isn't necessarily something that would put me in a mood to eat, and same goes for many other people. We lose our sense of taste for sweet and salty foods by up to 30%, which is also partially due to the low humidity in the cabin. So my initial thought was that airplanes don't really have an incentive to improve airplane food because a lot of the time people don't have that much of an appetite to eat, and air sickness too, which isn't uncommon, and just having a lot more opportunities to eat when on the ground. However, for this reason, it was quite a shock to me that airlines are actually focusing more on their in-flight meals and seeing it as sort of a competition between other airlines. And with that, many people expect better food.
I think nowadays it's a little bit of a mixed bag with airplane food. It 100% depends on the airline you're flying. Some airlines will give you, like, no matter where you're going, it's going to be delicious food, be good food. Then others, they spend a little bit less time thinking about it, or it's a little bit less quality or whatever it may be. I've had really good experiences with airplane food and really not so great experiences with airplane food. When I was flying to Europe this summer to see family, I got some sort of chicken forget what it was, but it didn't taste very good. It had like overcooked spinach in it, which made it taste bitter and bad. And I really did not like it. But then when I was flying back, I had a really good, I think, Thai chicken. And it was cooked really well. It tasted really good. And I wanted to get seconds. So it's a very weird discrepancy between flights. It depends. I guess it depends where you're going, where you're coming from, what airline you're flying, and what they prepared for that day. And whenever I fly, I fly in economy because I'm not going to pay $6,000 for like a 6-hour flight. But one time when I was quite young, probably about 12, I flew to Europe by myself to see family. I was with like the escorting. I wasn't allowed to go by myself because I was 12. So they would escort me through customs or whatever. And probably about 10 minutes into the flight, the flight attendant said, "Come with me." And she took me from economy to business class because I guess they had a seat open. So when I remember it's a really weird experience to be in business class when you're never in business class because you're like, whoa, this is all so much fancier, and the food is much fancier. Like when you're in economy or wherever that's not business or first class, they usually give you like dog vomit in in like a plastic tray that was like reheated in like a microwave. But when you're in first class, like I ordered a steak and potatoes. They brought it to me in like a super nice plastic tray. They had like metal utensils on the side with like nice reusable napkins and salt and pepper shakers, and it wasn't in a plastic bag. It was fully on a plate, and it looked like I was in a restaurant, and it was just so strange because I was like, how is this airplane food? And it tasted really different than the other stuff. Like it tasted very like authentic. It wasn't 20 different flavors competing to just make you be like, here, it's flavorful, don't say it's bland. There is the discrepancy of what airline you're flying, where you're flying, but also where you are in the plane. I understand why you might get a nicer meal in business class or in first class, but it was so different. It just tasted so different, and it was really mind blowing.
By that, I'm not surprised because for a lot of airlines, their food has sort of become their marketing strategy. It draws people in and is an even more incentive for people to upgrade to business or even first class. Now, of course, it is much more expensive, but that gap in the quality of food that you're going to get is also very significant. With the pandemic, a lot of airlines stopped giving food altogether. Economy class flyers often wouldn't even get a meal if the flight wasn't long enough. They would mostly just get like a small pack of peanuts and water, which, I don't know, compared to how it was back then, it's kind of sad if you think about it, compared to the elaborate dishes you'd find in airplanes in the 1900s. Now, the food that they did provide, like you said, is kind of a hit or miss. There was another flight I went on, I think it was Norwegian Air. Now that I look back at the reviews, a lot of people say that the flight and everything were really smooth, except for the food, which was terrible, which, I mean, I agree with. I think I was also pretty young at the time and saw on the in-flight menu that a meal in the economy class was like $29. And I think it was like an eggplant parmesan or eggplant lasagna or something. And when they started rolling the meals out and people started opening them, I was like, okay, that looks gross, soggy, and smells bad. That just looks unappetizing. If I wanted to eat soggy and stale-looking food, I would have just gone to school. Now, for that and to pay $29 for it while being stuck in an airplane thousands of feet up in the air, it's definitely not worth it. And after the pandemic, or even during, food in the economy class kind of disappeared as a whole, which makes me uncertain about the future of airplane food.
Yeah, I mean, airplane food has kind of been the same for a few decades. It's that same plastic box thing. We all know it. We've all eaten it before. So there are a few parts to the future of airplane food that I think are pretty exciting. One of the designs are auto mats on planes. Now, if you don't know what an automat is, they were really popular back in the early 1900s and in the mid 1900s in America, especially in America. It was all about convenience, right? It was pretty much like a vending machine. You put, like back then it was probably like 25 cents, and they would open, one of the small little pockets would open, and they would have like a sandwich, like a pre-prepared sandwich in them. And you take that, and that would be your lunch. They're thinking about implementing those on planes for a few reasons. One of the reasons would be you could eat that whenever you want. One of the big struggles about eating on a plane is that, especially like on the night flights, you might be trying to sleep, and then all of a sudden the lights come up, and they're like, all right, who's ready to eat? You're like, actually, I'm not ready to eat. I'm going to go right back to sleep. So you go back to sleep, you wake up, and dinner, lunch, or breakfast, whatever it was, is done. And then you're feeling hungry, and you can't eat because they stopped giving out food. So that's a problem, especially for people who need to sleep and to catch up on jet lag or whatever. So having these automats, you can get your food whenever you want. It might create a little bit more traffic in the cabins, but if you have enough of them, I think it should be good. It also kind of gives you the option of ordering what kind of food you might want a few hours before you get on the plane. What might be good about that is you might get better food. You might be able to order food from one of the restaurants in the airport, and that restaurant might be really good. So they might be able to prepare something for you and give it to the airline. So they put it in the automat, and there you go. You've got something better than gross eggplant parmesan or whatever. And this would be better because it might produce less food waste if you know what you want ahead of time. They don't tell you what food you're going to get when you get on the plane, for the most part. That's my experience. Even when you get the ticket, they're not like, all right, this is exactly what we're going to put on the menu. But the other option, which I think is also really cool, is less like a brand new design. It's just updating what we have already. If you get your food, flight attendants come through with their trolleys, and that takes a lot of time. And it takes up a lot of space. People get up to use the bathroom, it clogs up the whole thing. But if you have an automation process where like a robot on a rail system is able to come through and just kind of give you your tray, it would be a lot faster, a lot more efficient, and it would be a lot easier on the flight attendants who might also need to be doing other stuff, like helping out passengers. All these things, I think, could potentially make the experience better. The food, that's different. There are struggles for airplane food. As you said, Charlene, before, like your taste is very different. So things have to be a lot more pungent. If you ate airplane food on the ground, you would eat it and be like, oh, that's so over-seasoned. It tastes so bad. But in there, you're like, okay, needs a little more salt, but it's good. So the future of airplane food, at least to me, looks less like getting better quality food. I think that's slowly been happening, but it's a lot harder when you're mass producing things. But I think the future is going to be mostly being able to have that more efficient way of giving food, mostly using robotics.
I definitely agree that the automat idea would be beneficial to planes. However, ordering food beforehand, I think, would cause concern among the efficiency and convenience for many aircraft and restaurants and transportation, because you're catering to individual people who are probably ordering pretty specific things. The automat itself already streamlines the process with convenience, which I think is already enough to turn many people in favor of it. So I definitely agree about the automats. As for food quality and freshness, it's probably going to stay around the same, since it has to be mass produced and flash frozen, then reheated. And many factors like airline delays and shipment delays and customs cost plenty of waste for both food suppliers and to the environment. For delays, the food can only be used within a certain window of time, and if it's past, then it's considered unusable and it's basically all thrown away. So another big part of it for the suppliers has to be reducing the waste. Reducing both food waste and waste from things like utensils and trays, which are obviously being served to hundreds of thousands of people daily on flights.
Yeah, reducing food waste is a giant part of all of it. Things are obviously, they serve a lot of plastic because it's lightweight, so that's not necessarily good for the environment. and I don't believe that much of it is reused. So that's just more and more plastic being built up. So sustainability in food is good. A lot of airlines already have pretty sustainable, at least farming techniques. For example, like 10 or 11 minutes drive outside of the Newark airport in New Jersey, they have an indoor farming plant, which they call an aero farm. And there, it's stacks and stacks and rows of crops being grown. And the way they're doing it, they're able to produce 2 million pounds of produce a year with only 5% of the amount of water you need for traditional farming, which is great because it makes things really fresh. If it's 10 or 11 minutes away from the airport, things can be grown and sent right there, flash frozen, everything's super fresh. And a lot of other airlines are implementing this kind of stuff. Another way to make things more sustainable is having less food waste. And less food waste could mean better quality food so people eat it. Have it sponsored by a chef so people are like, you know what, maybe I'll go to this airline. They have this food. But I do agree with you, Charlene, that restaurants having to make specific things for passengers in a specific amount of time is difficult. But that would just mean airports would have to have better systems to do this. But it really would create less food waste. If you know what you're going to get and you're able to order something you want, you have a better chance of eating it. Some people flat out just don't eat the food on airplanes because they're like, I don't want fish or chicken or vegetarian. they're like, I just want a ham sandwich. I don't know. Or I want a burger, and they can't get that. So sustainability is the name of the game. Being able to have the least amount of waste and have people eat as much without wasting as much is going to be key. But people don't necessarily seek out the airlines that have the best food. Maybe that's like the last thing they think about. Like no one's like, Delta has this menu and United has this menu. Which one should I fly to get to Spain? It's like, no. People are just like, oh, right, I have to eat. I wonder what they're going to serve me.
I think the future lies in these vertical indoor farms. Not only is the food fresher, but you're also saving plenty of resources that would have been used in transport and preservation of the ingredients. And millions are currently being spent building more of these. Like there's one planning to be built in Dubai as well. And being more aware of what you're going to be eating and what you're going to be getting is definitely crucial in reducing food waste. Now, I know a lot goes into the planning and implementation of meals, but I definitely think something as simple as knowing what you're getting before getting on the flight and having options would definitely contribute to happier flyers and less waste of the food itself. So, what does the future have in store for airplane food? Will it continue to be memed constantly and brought to the same level as school lunch? Or will airlines be able to change their image and create even more efficient services and sustainable food? It's difficult to say. Mostly, it relies on whether or not airlines think that this is a good investment. Some airlines have started themes like Eva Air, which has a Hello Kitty themed airplane in service, which has attracted popularity and social media users. Although it is unlikely that most airlines will do this, being able to attract social media spotlights is a key to building a brand. Because although airplane food is one of the last things considered when buying a ticket, it could make or break the whole flight.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Spoonable Standpoint. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at spoonable_standpoint for our latest updates, link to our website, and other bonus content. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it. We release a new episode every other Friday, and we hope to see you there.